Hello, welcome to the Crackpot Podcast.
Watch now, here we come. No time for questions. It's gonna be a beautiful day to start up a revolution. Molotov cocktails, martini shotgun shells. Wild, 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 wild one. God forbid the cops get called. I say the more the merrier inside this free-for-all. By God, I gotta see it fall. I got front row tickets to the greatest show of all.
Hello, welcome to episode 63 of the Crackpot Podcast. This is our very first podcast that we are taping without James LaFond, but we're here with his dear friend, Dr. David, Dr. Dread. I forgot to ask you what we should call you.
David's fine.
David, okay. Thank you for joining us, David. We were supposed to have James, but he's on the road and can't be online. So it's just us. But he left me, he gave me some questions that I should ask you, and I have my own questions. So we're going to get started. I want to ask you how I understand you know James primarily through combat practice and arts, but you have a very long friendship. So I want to ask you how you got started in the martial arts.
I got started young. I was probably, 6 when I started. And the school right down the street from us, St. Patrick's in Baltimore, in Fells Point, there was a guy by the name of Stephen Remsky who was a real hard-nosed traditional karate guy who was teaching a karate program out of the school. And we got hooked up through him, all of my brothers, and it was phenomenal. He was a really hard-nosed, very stoic kind of traditional guy, and he taught a lot of things, and he was geared towards teaching kids how to fight for real and learning how to fight. But it was all the other stuff that went with it. And he's still one of my heroes. He's dead now, but he was one of my heroes, and he was just a phenomenally great man. And it's those types of people that you kind of run into. So universally you get attracted to people with mutual interest. And James is the same way. I mean, all these people, a lot of the people in the combative arts, there's a lot of what holes out there that are just idiots, and you could label them any way you want, but a lot of them gravitate for various reasons. And I started out traditionally, and then I expanded to all this other stuff with boxing and a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's how I started eventually hooking up with James. And, you gravitate towards people that have a similar mentality. So.
And this is definitely not my area, so I won't say much, but, it's the question of real fighting versus the, daycare karate that, I can take my girls to. And so I think that's what sets you guys apart.
Well, I think any of it's good, first of all. I always say now, as I've aged and I've done pretty much everything. Well, you can never really say that, but I've done pretty much everything within the martial arts world to some degree or another, because you kind of have to experience everything. But I guess it's a perspective of what you're looking for. I don't see that there's anything wrong with the daycare karate and all of that, as long as you understand what you're looking for and what you're getting. And you have to realize what reality is. And James lives in a world of strict, pure reality. I've always said that he's born in the wrong century in the wrong time. He was probably and should have been born in the gladiatorial ages where he'd have been more appropriate. So I lost you here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. I muted on my end when it's noisy, but then sometimes I
Okay.
forget to unmute it. So here is a question from James that he has never asked you. What is your favorite book
Of all time?
of all time?
That's not a fair question because I've written a few. So
Oh yeah, I'm supposed to
I'm
ask
biased.
you.
Yeah, I'm biased that I would choose my own. But I honestly, whenever anybody asks that question, I have to say that very young, I read a book called The Catcher with the Glass Arm. And I have no idea now who wrote it. I remember reading it when I was probably 7 years old. And for some reason, I just always remember that book as my favorite book. And at 7 years old, I was like voluntarily going to my room to read it. So that's the one that always comes to mind when people ask that question.
Okay, I'll look into that. I haven't heard of that one. Well, tell me about the books that you've written.
Well, I'll admit to a few, and I won't admit to a couple.
Okay.
I'm not as prolific as James, obviously. I started writing when I was in high school, and I just found it very enjoyable. So I just liked reading my own stuff. And most of what I have is just more of a selfish pursuit of just me beating on a keyboard. And I have the ability to type really fast and think in a manic state, a lot of times like James when I'm up for 40 hours at a time. So it's amazing how emotionally a lot of stuff comes out. But I just finished a book called Hands of Stone. It's not out yet. It's called Hands of Stone, A Surgeon's Fractured Tale. And that is probably the favorite piece of work I've written because it's basically about all the people I've come in contact with through medicine. It's a little bit of a sarcastic and kind of cynical approach to the doctor-physician-patient relationship type thing. So, but I've written a couple martial arts books just on more philosophical stuff. And one of my instructors and coaches who's now dead, Richard Bustillo, who was a first-generation student of Bruce Lee, and he was a very well-known boxing coach and instructor and Muay Thai and a bunch of other arts and Bruce Lee's art of Jeet Kune Do. My brother and I wrote a biography about him. The other ones I will not admit to. James has a lot of code names for people, and I've adapted that from him. So
I know that you are subject of his writings at times under code names, so I don't want to reveal those either. But well, I want to tell people that you are a medical doctor and actually you're a surgeon. Can you tell a little bit about your career? Because you mentioned that your latest book is work-oriented. So tell a little bit.
Well, I was originally a teacher. I mean, I got my degree in health education, and I wanted to be a teacher. I was always, like going back to my karate instructor, I had great parents, but I was very lucky to have really good teachers. And they just struck me as people that did these amazing things. I mean, I just realized how wonderful they were for me in terms of just everything, growing up and learning and not just academically, but all the other stuff through coaching and stuff like that. So I wanted to be a teacher, and I started teaching very early, and I loved it, and I still teach now. And I found it to be phenomenally rewarding. It was just a process of being able to see that light bulb go off and finding ways to get people to understand things. So for the longest time, I was doing that, and I just realized that I wanted something more, and doctor means teacher, and I was always interested in the body and the sciences, and it was a natural progression. So I did my graduate work in a variety of fields, and it just extended, and the next thing I knew, I was really ingrained in, okay, I'll be a doctor, and I'll see how this goes. Wow.
That's quite a career path to take without having the intention from the get-go. That's
no,
a lot of
I
steps.
literally, I was thoroughly, and I love what I do now, but I was thoroughly happy being a teacher. I taught everything from kindergarten through actually medical school at the time. And I was just having a wonderful life. I had every different level, and it was phenomenally relaxing and fun. And it's almost like you're performing in a way. So it's a great set of memories, but I've always had this natural progression to something. I don't want to say better, because I don't necessarily view medicine as being better than anything else, but medicine just seemed like the next natural progression. And I'm probably the overachiever, because it was very hard, particularly for at that time, where I was coming from and who I was and what era I was in terms of getting into medical school and stuff like that. So.
Right. There's a lot of barriers, a lot of like tricks or secrets or things that,
Well, there's a lot of there's a lot of nonsensical barriers, because you don't need to be necessarily overly intelligent to be a physician. You just need to be stupid enough to work harder than everybody else.
You have to work harder. I used to say in college that you have to be a bureaucracy athlete also. You have to, navigate your way through these arcane systems, and medicine has tons of that to get through the training.
I like that term. That's a good term.
Bureaucracy athlete, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so you have worn so many hats in your life then, as a teacher in combat arts, as a doctor, and a writer, and you're also a songwriter, James tells me.
Yeah, the writing part. See, it's interesting to me that the combat arts are just a reflection. That's why they're called arts. I just like the combat part of it. I think the artistic part is within the combat part, but the combat arts are just another direction. And most people I know that are into combat styles and systems, they also gravitate to, things like painting and building, and they're doing something else that I guess you would call creative. And I was fortunate, my parents stimulated us in a lot of ways through all kind of different activities. And I learned how to play guitar, and then I kind of taught myself how to play banjo and drums and piano. And clearly there's some genetics involved there somewhere that I picked up that gene. And the writing part just became easy. And just like I always used to say to James, we'd have these conversations when both of us were up for 36, 40. I mean, I've gone up to 80 hours at a time without sleep just because of work. And you find that you're better served not falling asleep, because you got to get up in an hour, and it doesn't help you. So your brain does weird things, and adrenaline has an amazing effect on expressing yourself.
Yeah, and that's he mentioned that is something you guys have in common, and you probably practice it more than him, is this, sleep deprivation. You mentioned.
Well, I don't know about that. He's had me beat it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. He's had me beat a number of times. Like I've worried about him when we've gotten together, and I know that look because I see it in the mirror, and I'm thinking this guy's got 40 plus hours on him, and he's still going. But
yeah.
So I don't know. He might have me in some regards.
Well, it's that strung out look. It's not good. You mentioned you grew up in Fells Point, and so you are a lifelong Baltimore resident. Baltimore. I still can't say it right, but can you tell me about your experience during the 1968 riots?
Yeah, I was 6, and it was interesting to me back then. Race was never an issue. Like we knew people were of a different race or a different color, but it didn't matter. You were either, a good guy or a bad guy. And we had a United Nations. I mean, we had Puerto Rican kids, Filipinos, blacks, whites, Chinese, various different, we had everything, and it was just phenomenal and wonderful. And nobody ever paid attention to it. And a couple of my friends, I grew up 2 blocks from the projects, and Broadway was kind of the separating point. And back then, we always say that I grew up in Fells Point when it was the slums, because now it's the chic.
Gentrified.
Yeah, it's. I don't want to get in political terminology, but it's just not what it used to be. But one day we were playing with our friends who were 3 blocks down the street. And then the next day they came up and they said they can never play with us again because we're evil and we're white and we're bad and all this other stuff. And when you're 6, you're just saying, wait a minute, I really like hanging out with you, and now you're telling me we can't. And, these guys they would come and just walk right into our house, and we would eat together and play all day. And then all of a sudden, one day we're out playing, and hordes of individuals are coming up Bank Street past Broadway with rocks and bottles and belts and bats and knives and everything else. And the next thing you know, we're running and taking cover from attacks from masses of people who were interested in trying to beat the crap out of us. And none of us really knew why. We weren't paying attention to the world. All I knew is that some of my very best friends now hated me. And that was it. My brother caught a bottle in his back. A friend of mine got stabbed. Another guy, he was a little bit off mentally, stood out in the middle of the street like John Wayne with a bat in one hand and a chain in another, and took on like 12 guys and almost got killed. So, it was an interesting experience when you're 6, 7, 8 years old and you really don't know what the world's doing.
And now, as time has passed, things have changed in Baltimore and the whole country. And a lot of people, you may be one of them, sort of see this kind of violence on the horizon again, or something, right? Some kind of either civil war or some slow decay and falling apart. How do you face that, or what do you see coming?
I don't see it universally through the country, but through cities. I mean, cities have been ravaged, and a lot of that has to do with political perspective that I'm happy to get into, but I'd prefer not to. And there's a mentality that exists. And for me, it's always about the individual. The individual is the most important thing. And the problem nowadays is that I think there's so many variables involved with people and why they do things, but ultimately it's the individual and it's their responsibility. So I don't like when there's blame thrown around for all kind of stuff. I mean, I don't care if you grew up poor. I grew up poor. My father worked 3 jobs, sometimes 4. And, we worked I was working at 9 years old. I mean, literally working at 9 years old. But we had the right attitude and we were taught the proper way. And unfortunately, too many people in the world are not, and too many people in Baltimore City aren't. And so they gravitate to things, but it's still their fault and their responsibility, and there's no one else to blame but them. And if they can get their act together, then the world will change. And if they can't, then you got to be prepared for the nasty that comes. I don't like to use the word civil war, but
yeah, I don't think it's quite right either. It's not really.
But I do think eventually good people are going to get fed up with it.
Yeah.
And the problem is when good people fight back, good people are punished. When bad people start problems, nothing happens.
All right. Right.
And there is good and bad. And, that was one of the things that attracted me to James, because I started reading some of his books without even knowing who he was. We hadn't even met. And, I just saw him in some of these martial arts magazines, his books through Paladin Press. And I bought a few and started reading them and thought, well, I like the way this guy thinks. I think he's a little bit psychotic, which is attractive to me because I'm probably that way myself. And then one day this guy bangs on my door, and there's this long-haired freak little hippie kind of, or big hippie kind of guy. Actually, he wasn't big then. He was thin. And he says, hey, I'm James LaFont. And I thought, Jesus Christ, like this is the guy who I'm reading his books, And he was just a cool, straightforward, down-to-earth guy. And he had a very similar perspective politically, geopolitically, socially, and obviously the martial art thing. But he was very I consider James one of the smartest men I know. And I know he'll deny that.
No, I completely agree.
But
yeah.
I mean, but my father was high school educated, and he's one of the smartest men I've ever met and ever known. And James is very much like that. He doesn't necessarily have an academic background to go with him, but that never meant anything to me.
All right. In fact, it means much more,
absolutely.
Because he found it all himself.
Yep. No, I agree completely. And that was very attractive because all of a sudden I'm talking to this guy who I'm reading these words and thinking, this is really cool. Like, he was almost a celebrity initially. That went away in about 10 seconds because I don't really have a celebrity fetish. Even when I meet like really super big celebrities, you find out that they're pretty much like you, and it goes away in about 10 seconds. But so that gravitated that way. And I mean, back to your question though, but I don't think there's a civil war. I do think that there is a busting point that's going to happen at some time where good people are going to say, we're tired of this.
Yeah, I can't call it a civil war because there's so many factions. Usually a war should have two sides. I mean, they could have more sides to a war, but we have all these factions and there's not much holding them together, like especially on the left where they have every kind of shape and size and color of particular faction that needs to be protected, and it's everybody's sort of has to pick a side. I think that's what a lot of ordinary good people are realizing, is that they're going to have to pick a side, and it could get difficult.
Well, it's not black and white sometimes. I mean, but I don't think it's multicolored. It's either black, white, or gray, and I agree with you. The problem is the gray area, that I don't know why you have to pick a side.
Right. You're
it's,
an individual.
Why can't you just all get along nonsense,
Yeah. Yeah. As an individual, you don't want to pick a side. You just want to mind your own business, but the others won't let you.
Well, yeah. See where I come from now. We had other names for it, but now we just refer to people as zombies, because they're literally walking around in their own little group kind of bored mentality, and that just always bothers me. So I a while back, somebody said politically that, well, you didn't build that. And I think, well, you're an idiot, because I did build it. And everybody I'm involved with built it. I mean, James LaFawn, when he wants to express it, he writes it. And he writes on multiple topics.
Oh,
so
yeah.
he did build it, Yeah. Nobody helped him with that. I mean, he built it. Now, granted, somebody will edit it and maybe review it, but he built it. I built my house.
Yeah.
I built the road to my house. I built the road to the road to my house. I built the road to the road to the road to my house, and I take care of it, and I do everything.
Well,
so,
you are the perfect demographic of the people, the person who is actually dragging probably, 30 or 40 people behind you in terms of how much you work and how you pay taxes. And other people that don't work and don't pay taxes and collect your taxes, so it's 100 times worse of an insult to a person like you who has this great career, and you're building not just your own life, but a lot of other people's lives, No,
the tax thing is a whole different story. I always say when people want to talk about taxes are just the government's way to rape you. And the problem is that Americans really aren't paying attention at all. And if they did, they would change the way they're running their own lives and the way they allow government to run theirs. Again, the individual is more important, but I work from January to June before I see a cent.
Oh, man.
So, and that's not an opinion.
No,
that's a fact.
That's
I mean,
a fact.
I go through these discussions, sometimes arguments with people about that whole concept. And it's always this, people want to live in a world of unrealistic thought and just nonsensical crap instead of paying attention to the reality and the facts that exist in front of them. And I can't live in a world that way because I run a business. I have to pay attention to things. So again, that's why I'm attracted to those people that think that way and act that way. And the combative arts and all the other stuff is just a way of expressing yourself. So ultimately, I want to go into politics, but I don't like politics.
What kind of politics would you go into?
Well, I mean, for instance, the basic situation is that with politics, I have to tell you one thing and then tell someone else another thing.
Right.
And it's exactly the opposite.
You're
so
not
I don't
suited
like politics.
to that. Yeah.
But, I would be a lousy politician and I would be offensive to pretty much everyone. So, but that's not a career choice that I would legitimately take one, but
Okay.
recreationally, I always talk about, I believe in the citizen representative. So I live in the past in a lot of ways. I'm a dinosaur.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think the 2 year approach, and then it changes hands and you go back to work and you're a functional member of society. And I mean, I don't have disdain for government, but I can't say that I like it.
Do you live in the city of Baltimore?
No, I
Okay.
still have property in Baltimore City, but I live in Baltimore County. So
Yeah.
I moved to the water because when the zombies attack, I have coverage.
Right. But I
You
mean,
know,
the
then,
city of Baltimore is just a fully third world
oh
political
no, yeah,
entity.
it's a fourth world at this point. Yeah, I don't. I think you're complimenting, and that saddens me. I mean, I'm proud to be a Baltimorean. I like it. I think Baltimore has a whole lot to offer. Historically, obviously, we showed a whole lot of our history in the development of the nation, and it really is an amazing city. People always ask me, man, why do you live in Baltimore? Like, what the hell? Well, if you're ever really in it, you realize that in 20 minutes, I'm out of the city and I'm in the natural process of the world with woods and water and streams and everything else. And in 20 minutes, I can be back into the midst of the metropolis. So locale wise, it's great. And the Chesapeake Bay is right there. And so it's phenomenal. It's just that we're a nightmare in terms of how the city's run and who's running it and all the nonsensical excuses that are being made about why we have all these problems. So I don't blame people for not coming.
Yeah, I think, well, that's true with a lot of mid-sized cities in this country that they have a lot of, there's a reason somebody put a city there, whether it's a river or a lake or um, a port or whatever it might be that in it was a good place to build a city and there has many advantages and many good people left in it. But these mid-sized cities have been the big target during the 20th century and beyond.
So
Just
I agree. I mean, I always say that all cities are the same. I mean, I went to medical school in Pennsylvania, so I traveled all through PA, and Pennsylvania's a beautiful state. But when I go to Philly, I feel like I'm in Baltimore. So
right.
Philly's no difference to me.
Yeah.
When I go to New York, I feel like I'm in Baltimore. It's just a massive Baltimore, and it's much more crowded, and people walk around with their noses up in the air. So, but it's still, to me, it's still the same thing. You know, I don't see it as being much different.
Right.
And that's why people gravitate away from the cities because the cities are managed the same way,
All right.
you know? So where are you? Are you in Seattle?
No, I'm in California. I'm in Silicon Valley.
Oh, wow. You're in the heart of zombie world. Wow.
Yeah. We live, just a little suburb, and it's sort of between San Jose and San Francisco, and I stay the far away from San Francisco. I never go there. That's real zombie zone there, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I've been to San Francisco. I ran a race in San Francisco when I was in college, and I thought San Francisco was an absolutely beautiful area. Like, it's just phenomenally beautiful. The people are nuts, but it was phenomenally beautiful.
Well,
And I would go back just to run, but I don't want to talk to anybody.
the whole state is really beautiful. The whole state is really valuable real estate. I try to tell people, when you pray for that earthquake to drop California into the ocean, you really are making a mistake. It's a beautiful state, and it could be easily reconquered. I think, just a small war band could go and.
I like your terminology about that. That's the third thing you said that I'm writing down and keeping. So
Oh, thank you. Well, you said that when you meet celebrities that you quickly lose the any kind of starstruck feeling. James said you met Hart at a radio station, the band.
yeah, when I was in high school, I wrote for my school paper, and Hart had come to 98 Rock at the time, and at that same time, me and one of my best friends, we were the traveling reporters for our paper. So we would go out and interview all these people. And Vince Bagley was a local Baltimore sportscaster who was well known, and we both liked him. and we were interviewing him for our paper. And WBAL, the TV station, is connected in the same building to 98 Rock. And we didn't know at the time that they were there. And this guy, Ron, and I, we get there, and there's this line of like 300 people. And here's these two high school kids walking down with their Archbishop Curly hats and ties. And, we're walking down like we know it all. And we go up to the front. And my friend Ron says, Ron and Dave, the traveling reporters, here to see Vince Bagley. And all these guys are looking at us like we're nuts because they can't get in. And they open the doors and let us right in. And as we're standing there, here comes Ann and Nancy Wilson. That was back in the days when they were super hot and the fantasy of every male. And we're both standing there, and there's Ann and Nancy Wilson talking to us right in the kind of foyer of the station. And they were sweet and very nice ladies, and we were Googling at them and just being lost as 16-year-olds, that kind of thing. I just realized after that, it was like, well, they're hot. Okay, we got work to do. Let's go. And that's when I realized, like, the celebrity thing just never lasted. So,
Yeah.
that's a shame because that could be fun, I guess, but I don't know how to experience that.
Yeah, I don't know either. I've have never really met any celebrities. Actually, I consider James a celebrity, and I sometimes get nervous. Actually, strangely enough, still.
Yeah, he's more of a celebrity than his humility allows.
Yeah.
I think I've told him he's a phenomenally gifted guy, but he's also, I think he's one of the most human of individuals because his perspective on things is just so, and I mean this as a compliment. It sounds like an insult, but I mean it as a compliment. It's just so plain, simple, and mundane.
Yeah.
It's just, this is it. And so he recognizes all these things. And I think he has a much more open mind than people that will have claim to all these experiences. And I always say that he should be much more of an exposed individual to the world than what he is.
And that's what brought me to this, like, just insinuating myself into his writing and doing this podcast, so hopefully, bringing some more attention to it. But yeah, he spent his career in grocery stores, and there's almost nothing more mundane than a grocery store, but he can extract the humanity out of all those people who just have menial jobs or stressful jobs, or just people who are doing the basic work that takes to keep this country going, and nobody pays much attention, and he can see, what's really going on there. So I like that.
Well, you look at it, here's a guy who left I don't know, $80,000, $90,000 a year job as a manager and said, you know what, I just want to write. And you're right, it's a beautiful term that you just used, this extraction of humanity. I mean, that's a phenomenally wonderful term. It is just an awesome statement because he can look at things. And again, his perspective comes from growing up in a violent world. And I've grown up in the same world. So I think that's how we're like kindred spirits, because you get exposed to that. And clearly he's had some more exposure than I have in terms of the totality of things. But he has a way of condensing it and then exposing it to the world, like you said, in a humanizing way.
Yeah, I think that there's something special about both of you in the fact that you have this physical courage, which has become really rare in the world. In ancient times, it was normal, I guess, to have to defend yourself or not to rely on police, or to face violence and face bad actors on a daily basis, and also not harbor this denial. I think that in this modern world, especially, I think of it as a liberal thing, but it's on the right too, but this feeling like that there's no really evil out there and you don't have to think about that. But you guys have gone out and prepared yourself to face that and to understand that about the world. And he's maybe because of career and because of different factors exposed to it more on a day-to-day basis than you have been probably. But the fact that you both put yourselves out there and train for that and understand that about the world, I think that's what sets you apart from the intellectual people of the world who get the time on the TV and the books, sell books and things like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like your perspective on that. And I think that's a 100% accurate statement, because the world nowadays likes the fluff and gander and all that stuff. And of course, James doesn't come off that way. And I always say I want to live my life anonymously. Like I don't care about recognition or anything like that. I just want to do my thing. And I have the things that I like to do. And as long as I can do them, then I'm content. And, again, that's why I think James is such a cool guy, because he lives his life the way he wants. And God knows he's taken crap from a lot of people about leaving a job. And, he's been battered and bruised psychologically, socially, and clearly physically, but from people that just don't deserve to be doing that to him. It's just not fair. And again, it's just a product of understanding who people are. And, you're a product of your upbringing and so many other variables that exist. But some people are real and some people aren't. He's real. That's the way you want people to be.
He's real. And then, there's that radius. And I told you before we started a little bit about the different people we've interviewed for this Crackpot podcast. We've had John Paul Barber, who went to prison for 6 years, federal prison. We have a friend in Israel who lives in an illegal settlement, and he's raising his family there. And we have Tony, who, also had a really rough upbringing. He never went to prison, but he went to jail a few times, and he's a truck driver. And just people who are, to me, in a different context, a different upbringing, they could have had serious careers or, been like kind of middle class people, but who, because of the different circumstances, have come out into this different part of the world, and it's this radius of real people. So that's what it's all about, in my view, for the James LaFond Crackpot Industries, which I call it, since I've joined.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the terminology that you guys use. Like when James and I talk, like I say, when you throw out words, see, for me, words, I always say words don't mean anything unless they're backed by an action. But on the hypocrite or the reverse paradigm shift of that, I just think that, words always are stimulating to me. That's why the writing thing came into play. Like words just for some reason set something off in, my limbic system. And it's just cool. It just brings joy or sadness or emotion or whatever the emotional response is. So he's got a way of doing that. And that just extends to people. You said it. It's their humanity. I don't care who you are. I don't care what letters are after your name. I don't care where you came from. I don't really care where you're going. It's just a question of, are you happy with yourself, and who are you, and what are you doing with your life? And if that's what floats your boat and makes you happy, then good for you. As long as it's reasonably legal and moral and ethical, then I'm okay. Even it doesn't have to necessarily be moral and ethical, as long as it's not affecting your body.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that point of view, but I think that we are maybe politically in the phase of learning that some things are going to affect you, and the people are not going to leave you alone. The people that you sort of have this handshake deal that I'll do my thing, you do your thing. That's a lot of what's breaking down.
Well, but I don't mean that in the sense of just being, an isolated island and all that kind of stuff. I mean that more in the sense of, I'll respect you for what you're doing. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to agree with who you are or what you do, but I can surely accept the fact that that's the way you are, and I'll support you, and that's the way you want to be. We can still find a common ground to be friends or to associate, and then we can have disagreements and just recognize that we disagree. And you can still be an individual, and you can still be, I'm part of multiple groups, and I enjoy that. I think the problem comes in is that when you become so judgmental that then you start viewing yourself somehow as, and don't get me wrong, I've said this all the time to people. People will say, well, you're no better than other people. And my response to that is bullshit. I'm better than a lot of people. I'm a better human being than most of the people out there, and I'm a better person than a lot of people. That's not meant to be an arrogant statement. It's meant to be, I'm caring, I'm decent, I'm helpful. There aren't people like that. So you're damn right I'm better than you. But I guess, Bruce Lee always used to say, in the eyes of the Creator, we're all the same under the heavens. And he's right. I think you can be better than someone in the sense of how you hold yourself and what you do. But really, what does that mean? It still doesn't mean anything. It's just a question of, do you accept other people and can you get along? And you're right. Politically, things come into play, and sometimes that's the problem. And more, I think people just need to talk as opposed to form into their groups and say, well, this is what we're supposed to believe.
All right. I agree with that. And it's incredible how well formed and strong those little bubbles are. This is my team, this is my view, and what is actually going on in the world has nothing much to do with that. Once you join a team, it just it can get really ossified. So, but I want to ask you if you're willing to talk about the medical field, because I will confess I don't have any doctor friends. Everybody here I know is an engineer, and and I was in finance when I was working, and I feel like everybody should have a friend who's a doctor, and I don't have one out here. So I have some curiosity about the medical field in your career. You said you work half the year without even starting to pay yourself, essentially.
Well, that's not that is a product of medicine, yes, but it's a product of the business of medicine.
Yeah.
And but it's also a product of our government stealing from us because taxes are theft. It's just the nature of things. I mean, I have $50,000 a year malpractice that I have to pay, whether I'm good or bad, and that's always frustrating. There's all these regulatory fees, and then, of course, all the taxes that are associated with it, that if you add up my total tax burden relative to my business, I'm a dinosaur. I'm a solo individual practitioner. I own my own business. Now, in this current time, most physicians, probably 85 to 90%, they are owned as an employee by some entity. Many years ago, as it should be, as it was correct, as it was right, and as it should hopefully go back to, physicians were only responsible to their patients and nobody else. You're my boss. You're my patient. I serve you. You're not a customer. You're a patient. There's a vast difference, but I serve you. I don't serve the entity, whether it be Stanford University or some hospital entity in California or University of Maryland or Hopkins in Baltimore. I'm not that person. I work individually. And I'm kind of considered that rogue surgeon where I don't follow the rules because I'm not employed by anyone. I don't answer to an entity. I run my own business. I have to know how to run my own business. And sometimes I do that well and sometimes I don't. But the medicine part is easy. The business part is very, very difficult. Medicine's easy. Surgery is attractive because it's very much like combat, particularly trauma surgery. You feast in blood and you learn to like that. And there's nothing better than having a mangled body coming into you and laying on a table and you put it back together. You can't pay for that. I've lied in bed many nights and looked at the ceiling and just thought, I just put that guy's arm back together. So that's pretty cool. But the problem with medicine is that doctors are, I want to be polite without cursing. Doctors are the smartest dumb people you will ever meet because they make lousy decisions for themselves. And now we're caught into this system of this mass grouping of individuals that are beholden to someone else and not the patient.
It's too much to ask of one person. I many years ago worked for a dentist who ran his own practice. And so I got a glimpse of this about, he had to hire people. He had to keep the whole place stocked and clean, sterilizing this and that. And it's too much to ask of one person, I think. And it's a miracle that guys like you are still doing it.
Well, I mean, look, that's why the stress rate among physicians is so high.
Yeah.
And that's why the suicide rate, particularly among like dentists and other people, is high. And it most of the time does not have to do anything with the patients. Although nowadays patients have a different perspective, which I would not say is a good one. They have this perspective that they're a customer and that they don't have any role to play except to be satisfied. And life isn't that way. It's still a wonderful profession, but again, I think the doctors are the top of that hierarchy, and all of the problems that exist in medicine are because of the doctors. So I blame my colleagues, because all we have to do is stand up and say, no, this is not the way it's going to work. This is the way it's going to work because that's the way it's supposed to work. But doctors don't do that. My experience has been very negative towards my colleagues. They cower in fear and they hide and they don't stand up for themselves. And so now we have mass groupings of doctors working for entities. We have electronic records. We have physicians sitting at a computer when they talk to a patient instead of talking to a patient, and they don't do medicine anymore.
Well, I see it as part of the whole development where everything is heavily technologized and consolidated and standardized. So, my family we belong to Kaiser, and I have to say that I have no complaints. They've taken good care of us, but you can see that they follow these boxes, and it works, it probably works 95 times out of 100. But you can see that it's not like I grew up with actually a country doctor who was a really nice guy and, helped my family at times when we needed help. And
Right.
and there's no room for that. One time I was uninsured and I had some horrible strep throat or something, and he went and scrounged through the office drawers to put together a full prescription of antibiotics for me, of samples,
Yeah. And,
You know.
and that's the way it's supposed to do. I always tell a story if I can. Like I was asked once about Doctors Without Borders, and my first blunt James LaFond type response is they're full of crap. Okay. And they are, but they do a really good thing. My problem is that I have colleagues that are part of Doctors Without Borders, and they'll go to Nicaragua and Ethiopia, and they'll be on the news, and they'll be on the magazines, and they'll be on everything else. But the homeless guy that sits outside their office, they will refuse to take care of. They'll send him to me because I take care of him. 15% of my practice is free. I do that because I want to. It's a lousy business decision. It costs me about $100,000 a year. But I do that because that's what doctors are supposed to do. So I have patients all the time. I still do house calls. I do about 20 house calls a month. And I'll ride by when I'm going home, and the old lady who can't get out, I go and see her. I don't charge her. There's no bill. I check her. We make sure everything's okay. We dispense what we need to do. If most doctors did that, there wouldn't be a problem. So that's the old country doctor. And I'll always be that way till I die. And the way medicine's going, I could probably stroke out tomorrow. So.
Oh, jeez. Well, and you talked about how high stress it is and how it's actually a big suicide risk. I had noticed that, and that was something I included in my email when we were talking about what kind of things to cover. And it's just medicine attracts people like you who are really driven and smart and work super hard, and then it kind of tortures them, right?
You're a very smart lady, and that's what James is the same way. It's just a matter of being intuitive, and you're absolutely correct. I know 3 reasonably good friends of mine who committed suicide just because of the stress involved. And, look, stress is an interpretive phenomenon. Attitude's a choice, but sometimes as much as you follow that philosophy, the choice tends to change what you're supposed to think. And I wake up every day and look in the mirror and just go, attitude's a choice. And then sometimes I give myself the finger and then, walk away. So.
Yeah. But it's part of the system that is, designed to kind of get in between you and your soul and make everything homogenized and and so what is the difference for you running your own practice between, like, if tomorrow you would to take a job in a hospital or a surgery practice? I don't know exactly how it works.
No, it's a good question. I am king of my domain. That's the way I like to say it. And I've said that to patients. I've had patients come in and they'll complain, and I say, wait, you need to understand, this is not a democracy here. I am king of this domain. Everything that happens here is because I say so or don't say so. And I don't mean that, and that sounds arrogant, and I don't really say it in an arrogant sense. It's a little more jokingly. But the major difference is I am king of my domain. No one tells me what to do except the regulatory issues that I have to follow. But if I were to join a hospital practice, then I would have to follow the system instituted by the hospital or the entity, whether it's a corporate entity or something like that. And I would be paid a salary, and then I would be paid a bonus based on my profitability. And if I was a good employee, then I would keep my job. And if I was a bad employee, I would be let go. And usually there's a non-compete where if you're let go, you have to leave the state because legally you're not allowed to practice anywhere there any longer.
That's so shocking. Yeah.
Yeah. That doctors allow that. Again, all problems are because of the physicians. So, but it's our own fault.
Yeah, but it's probably crept in so little by little,
No, absolutely. It's a developmental thing over about the last 20 years. And, again, without getting political, Obamacare destroyed everything. For physicians that are into it, they'll tell you, and that's because it's absolute, it's factual that it happened that way. But I know people have an emotional attachment to that term and process, but that just took us over the hill to insanity.
Well, hey, I don't mind getting political. We usually do get at least a little bit political. So I don't, you shouldn't feel like you need to hold back on my account. But could you, if you can tell us, my sense is probably that a lot of this was going on before Obamacare, and then Obamacare just did, finish the job.
You're correct. That's an excellent statement as well. Well, yeah, to the most part. I mean, some of the institutional things that were forced upon us, again, electronic records, mandates and absolutes and things of that nature. I would tell you right now, in the current system, as I see it, if I could get rid of my own health insurance and pay out of pocket, I would do that. I had 2 surgeries myself on my shoulder in the last year. And even with a high level Obamacare silver plan, Blue Cross Blue Shield, I am now up to $8,500 out of pocket, in addition to what I pay per year for insurance, which is almost $14,000 for health insurance. Now, again, I'm still stuck in the plan that we had when I started the business 5 years ago, because right as I was starting the business, the whole flux of the Obamacare regulatory process was already starting to manifest itself, and I was thrust into that. So I went from having Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield, to having some silver plan under Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield, and my insurance went up almost $4,000.
Oh man.
For just me.
Yeah.
And at the time prior to that, I had myself and my 2 stepdaughters on it, and we were paying less than I pay now by myself. Now, eventually I'll be able to get out of that, and I'll start hunting and looking. And if we continue to progress to a real free market system, then I'll be able to go to Virginia or Pennsylvania or someplace else and get a reduction and be able to afford it.
Wait, did you say that we're progressing towards a free market system?
No, I would hope that we would eventually progress back to we don't really have a free market system anymore,
no.
At least in the truest sense. And I'm a free market capitalist pig. So
that's fine. Okay, well, that was the reason that I brought up in the email plastic surgery and eye surgery, because those are sort of almost kind of like free markets,
Yes.
and so you see that people happily pay for those services. They don't want to pay for ordinary medical care, but they happily will pay for those services, and they the prices go down and the technology improves and blah, blah, blah. So that was the reason I brought that up, because I had gathered from James that you were a free market guy.
No, absolutely. And again, when the system proves itself that some other way is better, then I'll stand on mountaintop and sing its praises. But for me, the best process, and I think for everyone universally, is to allow that bannering and negotiating and bartering. Let's say you were uninsured and you came to me. I have it happen all the time now. Patients call and say, "Well, you see me, I don't have any insurance." Sure. First visit is going to be likely about $100 because I have to x-ray you. That's what you're really paying for. You're not paying for me to see you because I don't charge you. I literally don't charge for the first visit. Now, every doctor around me will charge $350 to $400. Okay. So are they going to come to me? Yes, because I'm cheaper. Now, the second visit will likely be $20 to $25 because it's not going to be a long visit. You're going to pop in. We're going to say everything's good or we need to do this and you're gone. So that's fair. It's fair to you. I'm trying to be fair because that's the way it's supposed to be. Now, the guy down the street might say, well, fine, I'll charge $15 on that visit. Well, then you may end up going to him. And then if I want to keep you, then I got to go to $10 or I got to provide you something else that you like. So that's the beauty of having that totally free market system. If I had my way and I was king of all domain, I would allow people to have insurance if they wanted. If they didn't want it, they didn't have to have it. And you could negotiate a contract with your physician however you would like, which is why concierge medicine is developing now. A lot of physicians are going into that. You pay me a certain amount of money a year and you have all of my information. You can call me whenever you want.
Yeah. Have you considered, I don't know if that would work in the surgery practice, but.
No, it'll work. It'll work universally because most of what medicine is really just conversation about what's going on. And a lot of times there is no formal treatment. It is just, that's why telemedicine, I'll admit when telemedicine came out, I was adamantly opposed to it. I thought it was total crock of crap. But now you start realizing that for some things, like anything, but for some things, telemedicine has its place because like we're doing now, you could show me your arm and go, hey, what do you think of this? And I could say, don't worry about that. The wound's fine. You'll be fine in a couple days. And
Absolutely.
then it doesn't cost you anything.
Oh, man. And having kids, I can't tell you how many times I have emailed my physician, described what happened, attach a picture of the rash or whatever it is. And just the fact that I don't have to go, I would pay extra. I would pay extra for telemedicine, because
Right.
I don't have to go to the office. But it's
Right.
cheaper for everybody. So I do appreciate that. And I do appreciate electronic records too, so I can see, where we are with vaccines or whatever. But it's the imposition that it is on you to, people don't appreciate, what it is to do this, like HIPAA requirements and all this stuff. It just adds and adds and adds to the cost.
Well, it's interesting. HIPAA is an interesting process because 150 years ago, even 25 years ago, HIPAA didn't exist. It wasn't an issue. Nowadays, I can get sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars if I have a text message. Realistically, you and I would violate HIPAA right now if we talked about your individual problems.
If
by
I
strict law.
if I actually
Right.
asked you a question and you answered it,
Right.
that's a HIPAA
Because,
violation.
unless you have some way, technologically, I'm very deficient in a lot of ways, but this needs to be encrypted and all kind of other nonsense and everything else. And I just think, really, I had a lawyer come to me one time and he gave me a form to sign and I took care of him for 20 years. And he said, listen, I want you to know that I want to waive all legality relative to HIPAA. I don't care who you talk to, how you talk to them, why you talk to them. You can yell in the street of what you do for me, and I don't care. As long as that'll eliminate all the crap that you and I got to go through. And I love that. I was like, fine, here, I'll sign it. I'll give you a piece of toilet paper to sign my contract, and we'll be perfectly fine. Because it really is nonsense. Every physician, everywhere, violates HIPAA at least 50 times a day without even knowing. So it's an absurd process. It really is. And again, but that's a regulatory thing that's developed. And the government has a wonderful way of forming job positions so people can get paid when the job is not really necessary. And that's all that is. That's why we have all these regulatory boards and everything else. It's just ridiculous what you have to go through.
Yeah, it's always this backwards looking protection, like, well, one thing went wrong, so now we're going to protect against that one thing, through the government regulations, and then other things will go wrong, because the system's not set up to detect things.
Well, you're very smart about things. You're right. You're smarter than a lot of the physicians because the physicians don't even talk that way. So it's an insane process that's just cyclically cannonballing down the hill to this, bigger and bigger avalanche.
So what would you say if we talk about, let's say, the costs of healthcare, how much of it is just this regulatory, you're required to have insurance, malpractice insurance, even if you've never been sued, you just keep paying?
Well, it's all of that, and I think it's probably about 80% of that. Obviously, there's multiple variables, but I'll give you the perfect example. If I didn't have such an extravagant malpractice, and I've been sued once in my life for a nonsensical lawsuit that never went anywhere because patients can easily do that. Nothing was done wrong. Everything was followed most appropriately. The patient didn't listen to anything and eventually caused all their own problems. Nothing happened to it. But, I'm free of any repercussions of that. But most physicians will have some suit thrown against them. And you then pay for that. That money has to be covered. Okay? The taxes that I pay, the routine board certification fees, which are almost $5,000 a year, that has to be paid for in some way. So when you Medicare reimburses about 8% to 10% on the dollar. Okay. So I'll give you an example. I own a surgical facility. Okay. With a bunch of other doctors. And I think 2 years ago, we billed out to Medicare $4.5 million for what's called surgical facility fee. Now, surgical facility fee incorporates everything: the building, the room, the OR, the staff, the nursing, the equipment, everything that goes with it. We billed out $4.5 million, which sounds like a hell of a lot of money, and it is. What do you think Medicare paid us?
Well, you said 10%. Did they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
we made about $450,000 of it. Now, if you just compute that universally through the extravagance of what healthcare goes through, this is why when you go to a doctor and you say, I have a form to complete, the doctor will say, well, it's going to cost you $25. Because when I sit down to do that form, that takes away the 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or in some cases an hour, that I could be doing something else that I need to do in order to make the money to pay the air conditioning bill or to pay my staff.
Yeah.
So when you start getting rid, that's why deregulation is always a wonderful thing. If you were to deregulate medicine, allow us to do what we do individually, all that would go away and it would be cheaper for you.
I believe that. And I believe that a lot of the people in the Democratic primary are talking about Medicare for all. And can you imagine what a nightmare?
Medicare for all is socialism. Socialism is evil. If you believe that Medicare for all is a good thing, you're evil. When the Civil War comes and the zombies attack, we will take your heads off.
All right.
James, I have certain people that I will be aligning with, and James LaFond is hopefully one of them. I don't know where he would stand in that, but I like intimate violence, and I wouldn't shoot anyone, but I would happily shove a knife right through your throat and watch you bleed and cackle in your despicable death. And I mean every word that I just said, absolutely, without any sense of exaggeration or sarcasm.
I believe
this
you.
Nonsense, this absolute pathetic, despicable, disgusting nonsense about Medicare for all. People that are saying Medicare for all is the way we need to go are people that really need to put their heads in a toilet and flush it multiple times. You should waterboard yourself and then go away. You are stupid. You are ignorant. You do not have any knowledge about the subject. And you are a pathetic, despicable, evil person, because socialism is evil. Socialism kills, and Medicare for all will kill. That's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. I think you're completely right about that.
Good, because I didn't want to get feedback from you.
No, I mean, I realistically think that I would like to see, and you here, maybe you can tell me because I'm not a medical professional or politically smart in any way, but here's what I would propose, maybe would be better than we have now, is something like an extremely really bare bones coverage that, if you get hit by a car, someone's going to take care of you. And I know that you would, personally, but something, administered maybe centrally or not, where everyone's can believe that if they get hit by a car, or something like that, they'll be taken care of. But then everything else just free for all. Just a little
I
baseline.
absolutely, I agree with that completely with one caveat. I would say that if you, as an individual, would like to add certain bells and whistles to that plan, you could do that if you wished. And then you could add payment to it. I don't agree that healthcare is a right. It is not a right. Healthcare is a product to be consumed. You could easily take care of yourself. You can't, I shouldn't say easily, but you can take care of yourself. So when people say healthcare is a right, well then, is it
Then
a right
doctors
that
are
you should?
slaves.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Exactly. And that's what you become. You become a slave. And then you will not get any care because there won't be anyone to dispense it. Your proposal is absolute and perfect. It will work. We know that because years and years and years ago it would work. And you could adjust that plan. They have these plans out now. There's these Christian groups that have formed large groups where you pay into basically a global pot. And then when you have that catastrophic or other problem, it's covered through that. And that's your insurance. And plans like you're discussing are what I would like to see, with the ability for people to negotiate otherwise through some entity that was reasonable. Look, I don't blame anyone for profit. Insurance companies should make profit. Physicians should make a profit. Businesses should make a profit. And they could make an insanely disgusting profit, and I don't have a problem with that. But the difficulty is, it is hard when you see people who are not receiving care and don't receive care because they can't pay for it. So there are ways to fix that, and it's predicated on one of the systems that you propose.
Right. And throughout history, it wasn't, the level of care available was lower, right? We have really hugely impressive medical resources now, and people might not realize that either. Like when you go to the OR, there's 20 people there, it's just it's a huge thing. So that makes it more expensive by its nature. But in a reasonably sane society, sick people get cared for one way or another. Doctors do it. You do 15%
Oh, no,
of
absolutely.
your, yeah.
Yeah, I'm always frustrated when people say that people are being turned away from care. No, they're not. You can go to any ER anytime and you will be cared for. You will be cared for. Now, you could argue whether it's good or bad care and all the other insanity that goes with the discussion, but you're going to be cared for. Look, I'll give you a perfect example. Just this past week, it was very frustrating for me. My staff comes to me and says, we got to talk to you about these 3 patients. So I had 3 Spanish-speaking patients come into my office over the last 3 weeks, and all 3 of them we had to hire a interpreter for. Now, we get reimbursed for that, but I still have to pay for it up front, and then we'll get reimbursed. And none of them spoke English. We had a very difficult time even getting a history. My staff comes to me today or yesterday and says, all of these are illegal aliens. All of their identifiers are completely wrong. Now, depending on who you talk to in the regulatory process, we just broke the law because we have a identification card that has one name on it, and then we have a patient giving us another name. So there's all kind of problems with that. And ultimately, the patient isn't going to be responsible for that. I am. And that's going to cost me money. So that's the problem with a system like that. And I'm forced to do that. And I would anyway. People come to me, I take care of them. That's the oath. I'm responsible that way. But at the same time, there are problems that are attached to that process.
It's remarkable what you say, because the situation with the migration it's people should be outraged and shocked by it. How much medical care is a big piece of it. People just come here. I was watching an interview. A woman was standing at the border, and they were processing a bunch of asylees, asylum seekers, if you want to call them that. And one of them was a woman who had just had gastric bypass surgery.
Right.
And how is that, possible? I mean, I don't even understand how you can have surgery. I don't know if she had it in the U.S. or somewhere else, but here she is standing at the border, needing extra care from the Border Patrol people because she was just out of surgery.
My usual response in a lot of ways to a lot of this information is step back from the emotional response and let's look at the totality of the situation. And then usually smart people will come to a commonsensical approach. The problem is there's not a lot of smart people anymore, and there's not a lot of common sense anymore. And those questions you pose are most appropriate because it makes you think, how is all this even feasible that this is going on? And, again, honestly, to go back to a very blunt, commonsensical approach to things, a lot of our problems universally throughout the world, much less our country particularly, would be solved very simply if instead of having the taxes taken out of your paycheck, you got all of your paycheck. And that at the end of the year or every quarter, you were forced to write a check to the government. Because then people would start paying attention to all the money that they pay in terms of trillions of dollars towards things that you have no responsibility for. I don't fault you if you want to take care of someone on your own accord, but please don't force me to do that as an individual. I mean, I consider myself a good human being, and you want to get spiritual or, a Christian in some form or another, and I go out of my way to help people, but I don't want to be told I have to do anything. And right now, people don't even know. Workers' compensation, for instance, is another global cluster fornication of crap that the American taxpayer pays for. So all these people that come to your office that have a workers' compensation injury, how did you get hurt? Well, I'll give you a good example, and God love him, but I had a fireman who came to my office one day. This was almost 20 years ago. And I walk into the room, and the wife says, "He's a hero," without even me saying anything. And I said, okay. I'm thinking he's, some warrior from the war somewhere. And he's a fireman. Good. I believe you are. And I said, how did you hurt yourself? He said, I was playing volleyball and I sprained my ankle. I said, okay. Now, I don't understand. No, this is workers' compensation. He goes, well, it happened while I was at work. Okay. Well, I wrote this down because it was interesting to me. Over the course of 5 years, that cost almost $90,000 in medical care. Now, he's not paying, well, he is through his taxes, but you and I are paying through that. We're all paying for that. See, people don't pay attention to those little things. Now, you add that up 100 times over Medicare, FICA, MICA, PICA, whatever other tax you're getting, your property taxes, everything. People don't pay attention to that. Once they started paying attention, they would start saying, wait a minute, I don't want to do this anymore. And then people like you would say, hey, why can't we have this system? And they would pay attention to it.
Just to get a little bit politically nerdy here, the tax cut that was passed a few years ago, most people didn't understand it as a tax cut because the weekly withholdings went down. So they got a little bit more money every week. But at the end of the year, the refund was smaller than they were used to. So to them, it felt like a bigger tax. So
my taxes went up almost, I think, 3% from the new tax plan. So they didn't go down. Okay. I had very good friends of mine at the end of the tax season say, I hate Trump. I hate Trump. I hate Trump. And, okay, whatever. That's fine. And I didn't get any money back. Well, you're an idiot, first of all. So I need to tell you that because I love you, but you're an idiot. And you're better not getting any money back. As a matter of fact, you are better served if you actually have to pay at the end of the year, because that means that you kept your money and other people didn't get it. So that's part of the problem. The American consumer is not intellectually sound about economics. And I go through that with people all the time. They took more out this year. No, they didn't. You actually got more of your money, which is why now you're seeing that you have to pay things or you're not getting as much. So it is a problem of the American populace being educated to how the system works. Look, I'm a fair tax person. Like, I think we should eliminate all taxes completely. There are no taxes whatsoever except a single only value-added consumption tax. Neil Bortz is a well-known political guy who wrote a book on that. They had multiple very smart mathematicians, statisticians, and economic professionals that were smarter than you and I and everybody else combined. And they did the mathematics on this, and a simple value-added tax of 7 to 10% on everything that you purchase would give us more money in the coffers than anything we can do at this moment. And then you could start having money thrown around to do all kind of stuff. And again, people say, well, that's just opinion. It's not. It's mathematics. Mathematics are not opinion. Mathematics are pure. They're absolute. You can't argue mathematics. But see, people don't want to go through that. They're like, well, then you're punishing the poor. Well, you want to talk taxes? Corporations shouldn't be taxed at all. Not one bit. Corporations should pay zero tax.
I would agree with you.
It comes back to the infamous statement, though. You know, poor people do not hire anyone. So
I would agree with you, but I come from a background of being pretty strongly libertarian, but I also see that we have really abusive corporations right now, especially in the tech. You know, I'm out here in the tech world, and these are people who are doing worldwide wage arbitrage to keep their wages that they pay as low as possible, and they're doing worldwide tax arbitrage which if our corporate tax rate went to zero, then that tax arbitrage would go away. But it's partly also to appease other tax jurisdictions. So I don't want to.
I agree with you, absolutely.
And I don't want to get too nerdy here. So, but I do. I mean, I've come back from my libertarian points of view a little bit, because I do think there has to be some checks and balances in the corporate world that I've seen, with regard to labor, with regard to all the abuses of the tech companies right now with privacy and with, I mean, I can tell you about this. For medicine, for example, because of globalization, we are buying so many pharmaceuticals from India, and turns out that the quality can be quite poor. So I would say, from a political point of view, if I were Queen of America, I would say that we have to be manufacturing certain key medications, whether it's antibiotics or I don't know, you can tell me, but we have to be manufacturing these domestically.
I don't disagree with anything you just said. I don't like labels, but I'm probably a conservative libertarian if you want to throw labels out there. But I don't like labels. The answer to that is in my mind, if all of those regulatory issues and tax burdens were thrown off of companies, then they wouldn't want to go to, or wouldn't want to have to rely, or wouldn't have to rely on things. But as well, I'm not saying make it a 0% deregulation. You mentioned the words I like to use all the time, checks and balances.
All right.
A natural system, though, has inherently entwined in it a system of checks and balances. And you're correct. I agree. You can look at Google right now. Google, in many ways, clearly they provide a phenomenal product to the consumer. But Google is treasonous in what it's doing. I mean, Google is actively working with the Chinese government to do things that they are not working with the American government to do.
Yes.
And they're doing it intentionally.
Yes.
I mean, that is absolutely treasonous, because some of the work that they're doing is against the security and benefits of our nation.
Right.
And the security and benefits of other nations. So a regulatory process, I don't like regulation, but checks and balances is a better term, and I like that. And there does need to be that. You're absolutely correct.
Right.
And if those issues were resolved, which they can be, then we wouldn't have those issues because people would be here doing their thing.
Right.
And people in India would, and again, the universal global free market would dictate, wait a minute, India is charging less and their product is better. The American product has to be less and better. And that's what competition does.
Yeah, competition does that. It gets tricky because of the intellectual property that, Google can have American engineers come up with an idea and then force those engineers to go and implement those ideas in China, where China takes 50% of the profits. Chinese, Chinese have really strong protections for their industry. You can go use a slave factory in China, but you have to give them the technology. And that's where we are. So I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if this is a good topic or not that people are going to be interested in.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
But, it does come down to the human condition, and that becomes a product of the respect for the human condition.
Right. And that's the responsibility of each nation to protect its humans. And, that's what everybody's so eager to sell out is American labor, and this is, to be completely honest, it's like come to my attention because it's reaching this sort of middle class. But this is what's happened to manufacturing in America, and it's now, well entrenched into this sort of like professional. Your career is one that you do with your hands. You're a surgeon, but I'm sure you've seen it that in the medical profession we have imported tons of, whether it be like Filipino nurses and doctors or people who can kind of come in and undercut the market. And while we still have this stranglehold against like medical schools in this country, that there's only a certain number of seats that people that can be trained each year. So maybe can you tell us what you think about that? Medical schools and the supply of medical professionals?
Well, it's interesting. If you read the data from one year to the other, the medical school enrollment is up or down. Medicine is not a profession to get into if you want to make money. It's just not. I mean, I have friends that are making considerably more than me and in some cases don't even have a high school education. But again, if all of the regulatory and tax burden were taken off of me, then that would completely reverse itself exponentially greater. And I'll be bluntly honest with you. I mean, my business generates about $2.5 million a year. I make about $300,000 when all is said and done. Now, granted, there's other ways that money is shifted and things of that nature into, retirement and stuff like that. But I also work about 130 hours a week. Now, I have a friend who is a plumber who owns a large business and has multiple people underneath of him and does major work. And he's making almost $1 million a year in profit after all bills are paid. Yeah. And he doesn't even have a high school education. And good for him. And I love him to death.
Yeah.
And I think that's wonderful. And I don't blame him. And I'm happy. And I'll still keep doing what I'm doing. And I know how to do plumbing as well. But it is a little bit backwards. So you have this supply and demand in America and universally, but it's not adequately met. Just again, it's always going to come back to, for me, the issue of regulatory burden and taxation. And that's why people gravitate to large areas, because ultimately it is still a business. I have to make enough money to survive and also to pay. I have almost 11 employees for one person in one practice.
Yeah.
And it's not just, I'll give you, for instance, again, if the Democrats have their way and they gain power and we go to some insane tax rate, 50, 60, 70%, my business closes immediately. I have 11 people that lose their job. That's just a fact. It's not an emotional response. I'm not being political. It's just a fact. The mathematics will not allow me to keep a business open. So I would then have to go to another process, maybe hire a Filipino nurse who wants to work for $7 an hour because she's not getting a job elsewhere. And I'll have a concierge practice where people will pay me directly and I'll have 2 people working for me. I don't want to do that. But so
But the quantity, I mean, this, attention socialists, the quantity of care will go down, right? The actual number of patients that you can see with a staff of 2 versus with a staff of 11 has to be lower, right?
Socialism does not work in theory. Socialism does not work in practicality. Socialism does not work. It has never, ever worked in the history of mankind and in the history of planet socialized off in the Alpha Galaxy somewhere far away. It does not work because it doesn't even make common sense. And just bring it back to that. Yes, you're absolutely correct.
Wow.
I mean, you want to politically, it's interesting. I go through this with my colleagues. Physicians universally are very liberal, and a lot of them are into this socialized Medicare for all, which is fine because when the zombie attack comes, I'll have a lot of crab bait. These people are lost. They're lost in a world of delusion. And fortunately, people like you are thinking, and hopefully more Americans are like you, that they're thinking about this in a way that makes common sense.
Oh, well, I appreciate all your kind words, but I don't have high hopes of that.
I don't either. I am fearful that we are traveling down the road to further insanity, which leads me to hope that the Civil War may actually come, because at least I can die a noble death in the heat of battle in the middle of Baltimore City.
Oh, man.
So.
Oh, geez. Yeah, it's tough. I mean.
Well, and you have a good perspective that I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of people also have your perspective, but they just hide it, and they don't have a forum like this to talk. And look, I get that people can disagree. Fine, I love disagreement. Prove to me that something is better, and I'll say thank you. I've been educated, and I'll move on to your side, and then I'll work to that level. But bringing it back to the early part of the discussion, the combat arts are very involved in all these little fancy things that never really work in reality. And going back to James, like James was always very direct. Like he said, well, that's not going to work in a real fight. He's right because he's tested it. And so reality to me is a favorite word. You need to live in a world of reality. You can live in a kumbaya world if you want, but all these governing principles that you may think are phenomenal, they never pan out to be workable in the real world.
That's something I've been saying to myself lately, is that I wish I lived in a society that was not at war with reality, because that's what it feels like. Socialism is largely at war against reality. There's people out there who really believe that work is a conspiracy and that people should not have to work. They really believe that. Like the AOC kind of Antifa people. So, and then, this brings me to a topic which is difficult, but I feel that is the big one for us, and it's the transgender stuff too. Like you can't get into a more war with reality than thinking that this is, a legitimate idea.
Thank you. As a physician, as an anatomist, I mean, I've dissected over 10,000 cadavers in my lifetime, and I've been a practicing surgeon for almost 25 years. It's amazing to me that every insect, bug, and animal on the planet, outside of that rare amoebic form, can figure out which sex is female and which sex is male. And independent of that very rare circumstance where there's an XXY or some variation of a chromosomal abnormality, the smartest and most advanced entity on this planet, the human being, now can't figure out who's male and female. It's absurd. As a physician, I take care of transgenders. I have a number of them. The reason I have a number of them is because I'm nice regardless. I had one guy ask me who transitioned from male to female, what do you think about what I'm doing? And I said, my immediate response was, it's not about what I think, it's about what you think. However, I do think that there is a psychological component to this that is very dangerous, because the suicide rate among transgenders is significantly high. And the reason it is because however you want to define it, God, evolution, and to me, they're all the same thing. But there is a biological fact, XXXY. Now, you can think you're a woman, it doesn't make you a woman. I think I'm 6'5". I'm not. On a good day, I'm 5'9". I can think it all I want, but it's not happening. And for me, again, as a libertarian type approach, be who you want to be, do what you want to do. But I will not call you a he when you're a she. And I will not refer to you that. And you cannot make me do that. You can cut it off. You can take hormones. You can do whatever you want. You are still XX or XY. And until we can change that, you have not changed your gender. You are a male acting and performing like a female, which is fine. If you want to do that, God love you. Good luck to you. But don't force it on me. And I will not accept that you have you do have a right to do that, but I will not accept that I have to look at you in a way that doesn't make any scientific sense to me. What bothers me is adults are fine. If you're an adult and you want to do it, God love you. But we are practicing massive, despicable child abuse when children are being allowed to do this. So until you're 21, you can't even make up your mind about what you want to eat.
Yeah. It's really heartbreaking. You see these photographs of young girls who have had mastectomies. Like, these girls aren't even 18. They've been binding their chests, and they have malformations of their rib cages. They are now doing puberty blockers for both boys and girls, which prevents them from putting on the skeletal mass
exactly
that they need as adults. And there's no other, actually, to me, it's not even child abuse. It's really approaching child sacrifice. Honestly, this is how I see it. And this is a weakness of libertarianism, because you say, okay, well, you're going to do this weird thing. I guess you should just go ahead and do it. But the slippery slope is real. And, they're coming after children. And if your children are in public school, this is a serious thing. This is a serious thing where it's like a mass hysteria now that it sweeps large numbers of young girls at once. Girls are more susceptible. I know that they're doing this to boys too, but girls are more susceptible to this kind of thing, like anorexia or these types of things that girls do. To me, it's where libertarianism breaks down. And also, maybe you can speak as a physician, because so you could probably agree that doing it to children is beyond the pale, but even if you're doing it to an adult, that's a mutilation. It's not a medical treatment that's going to improve their lives. The suicide, like you said, the suicide rate it's worse for people who've been through the surgery.
Correct. Well, what's the first tenet of medicine? Do no harm.
That's right.
Right? Do no harm.
Yeah.
And yet we constantly do harm. And again, I agree with you on multiple levels. I don't know that there's a fix for it, because universally today people live in an emotional world as opposed to, again, back to that term reality. And what bothers me is that I see the havoc of this with individuals. Like, I could list 5 or 6 patients I'm thinking of right now offhand that through my 25-year career I saw as a male who now identify as a female, and they were a happy guy, and now they're a miserable, ugly woman.
Yeah.
Okay? And they're not just ugly. I don't mean in a physical sense. That's an interpretive phenomenon. But they're an ugly woman because they're just an ugly person. Like, they no longer even visualize themselves as a human being, much less a male or a female. And look, my experience has been that's been universal 100% across the board. Years later, there's this massive change, like, oh my God, what did I do to myself? And for children, they have every right to say, you were my parent. Why did you allow this to happen?
Absolutely. And someone who's a doctor who has these years of training and incredible power as a person who can alter your body, and seeing these smiling doctors next to these children makes my skin crawl. I mean, I don't know how they can live with themselves.
I'm in complete agreement. What baffles me is the fact that you're saying all these things and you live in California.
I need to get out of here.
Well, no, it's just, I've been to California once or twice. I think it's a beautiful place. It's a nut state. I don't wish it to fall off the end of the continent and, go into the ocean. But I can't say that I know anybody in California that has the opinions that you do. And I know that's a blanket, ridiculously stupid statement. I just say it as a joke. But you're absolutely correct. And it's amazing that people think the other way. You just say, how can someone think that way? It just doesn't seem to make any sense.
It doesn't. And I'm pretty isolated out here. We have a little bubble of homeschooling families that tend to be more conservative, but most of these topics we just don't broach because it's just too much for day-to-day conversation.
Well, I agree with you. Like, again, I was a teacher, and I could not see myself now being a teacher and then have, now they are actually writing lesson plans for homosexuality, transgenderism, LBGTQ, ABC, FYG, whatever you are. And they're writing all these curriculums that they want taught in elementary school.
Right.
That to me is again, you mentioned child sacrifice. That's a much better term. It's disgusting. And it's not disgusting because I agree or disagree with it. It's disgusting because the child's mind doesn't have an ability to functionalize all of that in a reasonable way. That's why there's parents and people to help guide you through those things. It's hard enough going through puberty, for crap's sake.
Exactly.
I mean, like, God almighty, everybody remembers what that was for girls and boys.
Yeah.
And when you look at the anatomy and the physiology, in some cases, puberty is extended into the 20s for some people.
Right.
And for men, it goes to about 95.
Age 95.
A little slow on the uptake there. But,
Yes.
because men just reside in a pubertal state of hedonism and everything else that goes with it.
Well,
Thank God for that, by the way.
And what?
I said they just reside in that state of hedonism and pure sexuality, and I thank God for that every day.
Thank God for that. Well, we do talk about masculinity and sometimes a little bit about femininity, but we try to keep it to the masculine side for this, for the audience that we have, which is about 95% men. But, it's such an insult to men to say that, all you have to do is administer hormones and do a little surgery, and now that this little girl will grow up to be a man. And it's likewise, I really am insulted by, the drag queen thing and the idea that, father of 6, Olympian, married 3 times, is now a woman because he had surgery of this and that. It's just completely wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess my response to that is to each his own, but I really don't like your own,
Yeah.
without trying to be offensive. And I'm very easily offensive in many ways, and again, I agree with you. And I like the fact that other people have a sense of some type of universal agreement with that, because again, it just seems to make common sense. The cosmic universe has designed us in such a way that unless there's a planet out there that really does have a male and a female and some other intermediate gender, at least here on the planet Earth, there's males and females. And you want to act like a man, fine. You want to dress up like a woman, fine. Preferably you do that in your own community and you don't influence children that way. Let them figure it out themselves when they become adults. And if they figure it out, then fine. Same way with homosexuality. I don't understand how a man can look at another man and go, God, I got to have that. I just don't get that. But does that make it right or wrong? No, it doesn't make it right or wrong. It just makes it something that I don't have any interest in. And I'll fight for your right to be that way. Please just don't force it on me. And I won't force my heterosexuality on you. Unless, of course, you're a really hot lady and I'm interested in you, and then I might make a feeble attempt on trying to.
Well, and I don't want to harp on this too much, but it's your libertarian point of view, which is so laudable and which is so agreeable, that turns out to be the weakness of our society, because you are so accepting, you are so, open-minded, at least not for your own practice, but for what other people are doing. And we see that the slippery slope is a real thing, and that they will come after your children, and
Right.
that it's now, I mean, June is over. Gay Ramadan has so exhausting. Every corporate brand, every, billboard, everything has to be gay in June.
Well, yeah, no, don't get me wrong, Lynn. I agree with you. My statement is always this. I'll let you be whatever you want, but I don't have to agree with you. And
Right.
don't make me agree. Like, now that's what it is. If you don't agree with transgenderism, you're an evil, disgusting person. Well, that's just nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. I
It's
don't
actually
agree that you don't.
backwards.
Well, yeah, exactly. I don't necessarily agree that you smoke cigarettes, but again, don't force it on me. And I don't want to deal with that with you. Fine, go ahead and do it. You want to destroy your lungs and hurt yourself, go ahead. But you're right. I don't want it forced on people, and I don't want it forced on children. Let people develop, then you let them make up their mind. And I think naturally, most of what we're doing with the whole transgender issue is disgusting to children, because we have adults now forcing this insanity on the children that then leads them into a world of hatred for themselves, suicide, physiologic and anatomic damage. They are permanently, and they're dehumanized, they're demasculinized. James, that's a favorite topic of me and James, because this feminization of the man, it's ridiculous. I can take care of myself. If the zombie attack comes, I'll grow my food, I'll catch my food, I'll kill my food, I'll take care of myself. Nowadays, there are men that cannot do anything for themselves. And to me, that is despicable. And at the same time, there are women who don't even act like, and again, this is in today's world a very bad statement, but I don't really give a flying crap. But there are women who don't even act like women anymore. And there are reasons why there's roles. We are different. We're vastly different. And that's purposefully designed that way through evolution.
Yes, it's part of the whole dehumanization thrust that we're in, there, where men shouldn't be men. It's not. It's masculine traits are to be ashamed in men, natural men, but to be praised in women, and vice versa. And it all goes together.
It was interesting. Here's a good story with James. There's a place up where his mom lives when he's in town, if he's visiting there. And it's a great little restaurant. We've gone to a couple times. And there were one time him and I walked in there, and, he can be an imposing figure with the way he looks. And, we walked in and we're standing there, and both him and I have the same mentality about things. And kind of almost simultaneously, we sat down and we looked at one another, and I said to him, and he said exactly the same thing as I was saying it. I said, if anything goes down in here, you and I are the only guys that are going to be able to do anything, because we both scan the entire place. And you're looking at these, again, you're looking at these skinny jean, bun having hair guys that are, they act and look like a woman. They don't even have a size on it that looks like they could carry their own weight, much less the weight of anybody else. And James and I are looking at one another and just saying, okay, there's the door. Here's our environment. If the bad guys come in, here's what we're going to have to do, because there's only two men in here that are going to be able to do anything. And it brings back to his terminology about just watching men become so feminized that, again, he lives in a different time. Like, he's just a gladiator that should be in the arena. It's ridiculous.
It is. It goes, and I don't even think of it as feminized, because, like you said, there's women that don't know how to act like women, and men that don't know. It's like both people are being neutered. Both people are being formed into a worse version of themselves. And switching places is encouraged, but it's not even required.
No, again, you have a good choice of words that I like very much, because it's a very good perspective in terms of what seems to be allowable. I've run into a lot of political people that are on kind of the side that I tend to be on, and a lot of them will just say, no, we're not doing this anymore. No, you go do whatever you want to do, but don't force it on me, my family, and force it on everyone else. No, and I will not accept this, and I will not ever agree to accept it. And I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
And, you're correct. I mean, it's always interesting to me how women and men, universally both of us, but women will always want to question, like, why men are the way they are. Because it's biologic, for God's sake. And it's the same reason why women are the way they are. It's biologic. We're animals. We just happen to be relatively intelligent animals, at least relatively being an interesting word. But
Right.
God almighty, why is this so hard to figure out?
Yeah.
It's not that difficult. Yet, again, people want to make it difficult for whatever their reasons or agenda are. And I think it's because they're just miserable with themselves. And that comes back to the beginning of people just being able to express themselves. And they don't know how because they're just miserable with who they are. And so they find ways to make everybody else miserable.
Yeah. Well, you said that that there's the conservatives maybe are going to say that I'm not, this is a line, I'm not going to do this. And you said it for doctors. You said, "Oh, it's the doctor's fault. They're the ones that put up with this." And so it's the question of, how much you can get away with when you do it incrementally versus now that things seem to be accelerating, things are getting weirder faster.
Well, yes, I agree. And but that's because, just as you said earlier, all this has been developing for a good while in a lot of ways. And then all of a sudden, the snowball becomes a big ball. And again, it's rolling down the hill now faster than ever. I mean, it's not a slippery slope. It's greased and lubed and at a 90-degree angle.
Yeah.
It is. And I don't have the answers necessarily. I don't know that anyone does, but I do think that good people need to start standing up. My biggest issue all the time is, why are we backing down? Like, why do people back down? Like a perfect example is, let's say, for instance, like now the wonderful term in the world is, you're racist. You're racist. Oh my God, you're racist. Such a stupid term. So what if you are?
Yeah.
I mean, all that says is that you're really an idiot and you're stupid because you judge people based on a color of their skin as opposed to who they are. How freaking stupid is that? It is insanely stupid. So, but let's say you are. Okay, big deal. How does that affect anything? Unless you're putting that into action, which most people don't. These racists that are really out there, the NAACP is one of the most advanced racist organizations in the history of mankind. They identify everything they do solely based off race. That is the literal definition of racism.
When I was in college, paying my own way, working a lot, studying hard, I got a letter from the NAACP to donate so that colored persons could go to college, and or maybe it was United Negro College Fund. It was one of those. But I just thought, are you insane? Like, who sent me this letter? I am paying for my own college education. I got
right.
so
Well,
angry.
but again, in and of itself, think of that. In and of itself, that is racist to its core, because that immediately establishes a mandate that somehow blacks aren't capable of going to college on their own or are not capable to find a way to pay for it. That is insulting. It is despicable. That is the definition of racism. So again, people get lost in the terminology, but when that terminology is processed into functional action, that's when it becomes a problem. I always say words do not hurt. They don't mean anything unless there is some action attached to them. And that literally, I go to the core of that when people say, I'm going to kill you. Now, granted, in today's world, you can't go on social media and say that. And rightfully so, that becomes a problem. But really, in and of itself, the action is what's the problem. And so we get so lost in words. And granted, I'm not for banning words, but you got to have common sense about this. You don't walk into a theater and yell fire when there's no fire. That's just common sense again. But we get lost in all these words, transgenderism, racism. And then again, that word becomes this entity that is forced and thrust upon people. And then you're told you have to be this way. No, I don't. I will not accept that philosophy. Good luck to you, but do not force it on me. And then that's why, if it comes down to it, I can rely on the combative arts to say, fine, we can step outside and settle this like men. And one of us is going to walk away and one of us isn't. And most of the time, it's going to be me walking away.
Yeah, thank goodness for all that
So-
training. I think I have to call this the end because if it gets too long, it gets a little bit unwieldy for me. But it's been a great pleasure speaking with you and a privilege, and I really appreciate that you have done this and persevered even though James canceled because, you know, this is actually the first time we've spoken. We waved hello when you were in the bar the other day with Ron, but this is the first time we've chatted, and it's been fantastic. And I think I would love to do it again, maybe when James is back too, so that we can talk about.
Yeah, that would
stuff.
be a nasty dynamic duo, but I would love that. I would love that as well. I appreciate your time greatly. This was an honor for me. So I thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll do it again. Thanks a lot. And I will put links to your books if they are available. Are they available on Amazon or somewhere?
Right now there's only, I got to think. No, right now most of them are in book form, but they're not available because I'm like James. I do these multiple rewrites, so I print it once and read it. So the Hands of Stone book will be coming out formally for availability and purchase, and to make me a multi-million-dollar author.
Yeah.
Hopefully within 2 months.
All right. Very good. I hope so too. I hope you sell 1 million and James sells 1 million.
Yeah, well, I wish for him more so, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, David, and take care, everybody. That was the Crackpot Podcast first and hopefully only edition without the Crackpot present. So it's a special episode. Thanks a lot.
Getting late and we've got shit to do in outer space. Mothers can wait. We will take the ones worth saving. Pack your bags, we are vacating now. Forever. There's a cosmic radio in my head, and it's reading news articles, and the correspondent sadly said the universe is flat. He also mentioned that gravity is caused by our cavities and our reflection of time's not a receding hairline, it's all mass produced in the back of our mind. There's some things that we will never know, and I don't ever want to know. And so it goes. Let's buck it up, let us run amok. Let's do the things that we want to do. the hills out yonder, through the traffic and the people,